President Ebrahim Raisi will now be taking the oath of office before Parliament. The hardline cleric has vowed to take steps to end crushing U.S. sanctions. He takes over from Hassan Rouhani, who negotiated the 2015 nuclear agreement with 6 world powers. The U.S. withdrew from that deal under Donald Trump. Raisi will now take over those stalled international talks. Well, we're joined now by Sanam Shantyaei from our International Affairs Desk. Sanam, thanks for being here. Why are we seeing 2 ceremonies for Raisi in 1 week?
That's a really good question, Kate. The way the Iranian president enters office is rather complicated. So I do think, and I may be mistaken, but I think the Islamic Republic is one of the very few countries in the world that does this over several days, much like an Indian wedding, but less fun. And the reason for this is because the power structure in Iran is rather intricate. Now, on Tuesday, we had part 1. That's what we refer to in Persian as tanfiz. That's, of course, the ceremony during which Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the country's supreme leader, the highest power in Iran, officially endorses the president. Don't be mistaken, this is a symbolic gesture. We know that the presidential candidates in the first place, to be able to run, would have to have the stamp of approval from Khamenei. So that event takes place to show that the buck doesn't stop with the president. Now, in addition to that, it's a ceremony to show that there's a rather peaceful transition of power from one president to the next. That's why on Tuesday, most likely you would have seen images of the outgoing president Hassan Rouhani. But as you mentioned, Kate, that is the date when the 4-year mandate of Ebrahim Raisi would have started. Now, today we have the swearing-in ceremony, known as thorny. Now, what happens there is you've got the president who's presented to the parliament, to Majlis. In addition to that, you'd have members of the Guardian Council, the very body that would have vetted the presidential candidates. Now, what happens is you also have foreign dignitaries, and on this occasion, I believe you have presidents from Iraq, and these are allied countries, Afghanistan, representatives from the likes of Syria, Russia, even the European Union. But what happens next, in my very humble opinion, is the most important part. That's when Ebrahim Raisi will present his cabinet lineup.
Now, he is described as an ultra-conservative. What does that really amount to in Iranian politics, rather?
Okay, that is another great question, because we do hear these terminologies more often than not. Ultra-conservative, hardline, centrist, reformist, moderate. And do they actually mean anything, given that we know that when it comes to some of the most pivotal policies, it's Ayatollah Khamenei, who I mentioned earlier, who makes those decisions? Let's firstly delve into that definition. Ebrahim Raisi is not only bringing that ultra-conservative face to Iranian politics, but his presidency, it strengthens, it empowers the conservatives more. Remember, they were by majority voted in when it came to the 2020 parliamentary elections. Now, we know that the conservatives in Iran don't want a real détente with the international community or even the Americans, though when it comes to the nuclear policy, it's Khamenei, so he needs to follow suit when it comes to that. Now, when it comes to the actual negotiations, he has made it very clear that he wants to adopt a much tougher stance with the other world powers, much like what he wants to do with Israel. Now, another reason that Raisi has this title is because of his background. We know that he's actually placed under U.S. sanctions because of the role that he allegedly played in executing thousands of political prisoners in Iran back in 1988. And so there are several reasons that I've just given you that dissidents fear that there'll be even more repression in a country like Iran. Very different to what we had at the beginning of President Hassan Rouhani, who at least came along, even though he didn't deliver, promised greater social and political freedoms. Just to leave on that note, I want to say, Kate, it doesn't really ultimately matter what types of backgrounds these men and women even at times come from. What really matters is the fact that they all inherently and vehemently believe in the values, the revolutionary values of the Islamic Republic.
Lots to keep an eye on there. Sanam Shantyaei, thanks for that insight.